Welcome, dear friends, to this live stream for Empty Cloud Monastery. I'd like to begin as usual by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So welcome to this session, Dhamma session together. Welcome all who are present live and also everyone who joins in to take in these teachings later. The topic today is dependent abandonment. Two big long words. Basically, the theme of how we can progress on the path through gradually letting go of things that are not helping us. And in that letting go, we can kind of stand on the ground that we make to enable us to move forward in a good way. So you get this sense from a number of suttas that we can give things up and stand on that space, that place of having done so, in order to then see, how we can proceed skillfully on the path through further letting go, but stage by stage, gently, if you could say gently or gradually, but not necessarily so. I mean, it could be suddenly and with difficulty, but these ideas around abandonment and the way it helps us to open our hearts and minds, further to the Dhamma is the key that we can take in and we can consider today. So I posted a couple of suttas in the chat. Hi, just seeing your names here. Those who've written in a comment, a greeting. Welcome, Rebecca. Welcome, Margaret and Madeline and Scott. Good to see you. I'll put there in the chat a couple of suttas that I'm going to be speaking about today, both from Majjhima Nikaya, on this topic of dependent abandonment. So I'm going to start with Majjhima 54, Potalya Sutta. Potalya is the name of a person who at the time of the Buddha was elderly gentleman who had retired. And having retired, he very skillfully gave away all his wealth to his offspring, to his children, his family, gave it all up, gave up the control and responsibility of it all, and was having a peaceful retirement. And he comes to see the Buddha, and the Buddha addresses him very respectfully, householder, you're welcome. And he takes offense at being called a householder in this sutta. So he's perhaps you could say, get the impression he might be a somewhat irascible older gentleman, maybe a bit grumpy. And he didn't want to be considered as a householder because as far as he's concerned, he'd given up the world. And the Buddha then was able to gently guide him into considering further possibilities for giving up the world. So it's a very touching sutta in this regard. This gentleman is initially irritated by the Buddha, upset at being addressed as a householder, but he very quickly comes around to listening and asking questions about what is the real letting go of the household life then. In this sutta, there's a lot of distinction made between household life and the spiritual path, that is renunciation. And we can consider each one of us, I feel, how this can apply to us. We don't have to give up the household life to let go of the suffering of the household life, to investigate, where the suffering is, and to turn our minds, turn our hearts, change our attitudes to the renunciant way. We don't have to ordain to do this. Obviously, becoming a monastic is enormously helpful in this process, but it is for each of us to consider, including monastics, where is the household mentality here? That is the relishing of the sense realm, the complacency around our situation. Where in this heart and mind are those aspects to be seen, to be understood, and how much is there an inclination towards the renunciant life, towards letting go of suffering, rather than steeping ourselves in suffering. And so these labels of household and renunciant are very helpful, but each of us, I feel, has the renunciant side and the household side. And our whole journey, isn't it, friends, on this path is to let go of the household mentality, attitudes, behaviors, approaches, and to incline towards the renunciant life. So in this sutta, Potalya becomes more relaxed around his time with the Buddha, and he opens to asking questions, because the Buddha more or less says to him, yes, you've given up your wealth and those responsibilities, but you're still dressed as a lay person, you're still kind of wearing what you like and going where you like and doing what you like. And the way the Buddha speaks to Potalya, we get a sense of perhaps a little bit more idea of his personality there in his old age as a successful, member of society who has gracefully retired. So I'm going to read a little bit from this sutta and tell you what the Buddha says to Potalya as to what is necessary to actually let go of. What do we really need to let go of in order to step away from the household life? And he says to him, there are 8 things in the Noble One's discipline that lead to the cutting off of affairs. So to really putting things aside and stepping towards freedom. What are these 8? And these are the 8 qualities, approaches that we can all consider for our practice to move us in the right direction, the direction of freedom, friends. He says, with the support of non-killing of living beings, the killing of living beings is to be abandoned. With the support of taking only what's given, the taking of what is not given is to be abandoned. With the support of truthful speech, honesty, lying, false speech is to be abandoned. With the support of unmalicious speech, malicious speech is to be abandoned. With the support of letting go of greed and lust, greed and lust are to be abandoned. With the support of avoiding spite and scolding, spite and scolding are to be abandoned. With the support of no anger or irritation, avoiding these mind states, avoiding growing these mind states, acting out of these mind states, then anger and irritation are to be abandoned. And finally, the 8th, with the support of non-arrogance, with humility, arrogance is to be abandoned. These are the 8 things the Buddha told Potalya. These 8 things, stated in brief, will lead to the cutting off of affairs in the Noble One's discipline. So this I find very beautiful, and it's a wonderful contemplation. We get a sense of the personality, the character of Potalya, the areas, we could say, most likely that he needed to work on in order to really step away from suffering. And we too, can consider these qualities and see where they may have a lodging in our hearts. So, yeah, just to recap: non-killing, non-stealing, avoiding dishonesty, honest speech, avoiding malicious speech, scolding, spite, greed and lust, anger, irritation, and arrogance. And we can, very profitably, very usefully ask ourselves on a daily basis, do I manifest any of these traits? And we may find it difficult to necessarily own some of these qualities, which is why it's necessary to keep inquiring, keep searching, keep questioning, to try and see ourselves objectively. For instance, we could say that whole societies of people are engaged in unskillful actions, killing, stealing, lying. And we can also say that whole cultures have a collective sense of arrogance, blaming others, scolding, judging, and finding fault, with others. And just to be able to broaden the view as we investigate in our hearts, where we may find there are harmful qualities such as these, and to root out the causes of those qualities through investigation, through contemplation, through understanding, through feeling out these defilements. We can then broaden the view and see where we may have become very conditioned around certain ways of being, where we look at others from a distance or look at those around us in such a way that we're cultivating these unwholesome qualities, avarice perhaps, or arrogance, depending on where you live and your degree of wealth, through generally great economic inequality and disparity, great injustices. We may find ourselves in a comfortable position, a safe position, and we can be very, careful to tease out where we may rest in that, where we may enjoy privilege, where we may have an attitude of entitlement, have that sort of arrogance around who we are. And I feel that Patali is a good teacher for us all, because he was perhaps somebody with status in society. He may well have had a high position in society. We gather this from his attire, as it's described, his parasol, his sandals, his clothes, his mien, his attitude, his carriage, somebody who's privileged, somebody who's benefited, who has good fortune in this lifetime. And we can consider, how we may have also status in society. We may have wealth. We may not have our own wealth, but we may have collective wealth as nations, economic advantages as citizens of certain nations. And all of this we can unpack and investigate and come to a place of recognition, that in order to step forwards on the path, all of this is to be let go of. All of the advantages, all of the attitudes, all of the views about ourselves and others. And this is a real process, it's there's always more to uncover and to investigate. And with great humility and great determination, we can search out, is there any arrogance here? Is there greed here? Is there an unfairness in the way that I'm consuming? Am I enjoying, the great luxury, delights, and forgetting that for so many others, these opportunities are not possible, and that there's a relationship between those two things. So all of this, and in the end, to simplify, it comes down to our day-to-day experience, doesn't it, friends? Where we lose it, where we get irritable, where we find ourselves obsessing about the things that we want, where we find ourselves looking down on others, judging others from a distance. We can investigate moment by moment to see where the suffering arises and then root out the causes. Root out the causes, I mean, feel what it feels like to be judgmental, to be irritable, to be angry, to despair, to have any kind of attitude or stance, just to feel what that's like, to feel what that's like in the body, to feel desire in the body. How does the body change? How does it feel in the chest, in the belly? What happens to the breath when I'm taken over by wanting or not wanting, or some view? And meditation, of course, is the way to connect with our bodies and to become aware of how we feel, how it feels, what feelings arise moment by moment. And so to root out the causes in this way, to feel the suffering, to understand the suffering through standing under the suffering. And so we can let go of the suffering and move forward toward renunciation, towards path. Renunciation is so much path because the path is the path of letting go, as we'll see in this investigation of these two suttas. So to continue, in Potalya Sutta, the Buddha's laid out these 8 ways in which Potalya himself can further let go in order to free his heart from suffering. He goes on to say, when we work in this way, work with the defilements here, we can consider, I am practicing the way to the abandoning and cutting off of those fetters because of which I might kill or steal or lie, speak maliciously, operate with greed and lust, blame or insult others, get angry, get irritable, or have an attitude that is arrogant. So one is practicing. The encouragement for Potalya and for all of us is to practice in such a way that we are seeing these defilements as they arise and letting them go, knowing, understanding how much suffering they bring. If I were to do those things, if I were to act from those defilements, if I were to manifest that anger, that arrogance, that greed, and so forth, then I would blame myself for doing so. So we can reflect in these ways to help us to let go. I would blame myself if I fell into these ways of acting through these defilements. I would blame myself, and also wise people, having investigated my behavior, would censure me for my anger, lust, arrogance, and so forth. And also on the dissolution of the body after death because of killing, stealing, lying, anger, arrogance, malicious speech, false speech. Because of those things, an unhappy destination is to be expected. And these defilements themselves are a fetter and a hindrance for me. While taints, vexation, and fever would arise when I act in unwholesome ways as a result of these mind states, there is no vexation, taint, there's no fever for one who abstains, refrains, renounces these mind states. And so we can consider in these ways and keep investigating, keep kind of purging the mind heart from the defilements. And this is not only on the cushion, it's not only in our meditation. I often find myself, you probably do too, when we sit and meditate, all the things that have happened in the day, anything around the acts and words and thoughts of the day that has been unskillful will come to the fore. And that remorse and that discomfort will manifest in the mind, in the body. So meditation is surely a way for us to review our lives and to find where defilements have gotten a hold on us and have manifested through our thoughts, speech, and in even deeds. And we get to feel now the suffering of that. And in that way, we get to redirect our behavior, redirect our speech, redirect our thoughts towards more skillful states, because we all want to be happy. We don't want to suffer. When we're mindful, when we meditate, when we're on the cushion, we get to really meet the suffering that may accrue through unskillfulness. If we don't meditate, very difficult for people because they won't necessarily connect. They don't necessarily feel the results of their unskillful acts. It's very tragic. It's very awful to consider how it is for people on the world stage, or even people around us who are behaving in ways that hurt and harm others. We know as practitioners, as people who investigate the Dhamma, who follow the Buddha's teachings, we know how much pain and suffering they're accruing. And sometimes it seems they don't care. They may revel in their unskillfulness, but we know that in the end, the results are going to be very painful. The destination will be a very unhappy one. So we can have great compassion for this lack of awareness, lack of insight. How fortunate if we have the ability and the inclination and the understanding to feel what we feel, to be aware, to be awake to how it is right now. Not just on the cushion, though, do we do this investigation and meet our remorse, meet our, edges where we've stepped, slid, eased into the unwholesome. But also in every moment of our day, we can be awake to how we're feeling and how we're manifesting in the world. And the more we develop our meditation practice, the more this naturally flows through, doesn't it, friends? That we become more tuned in to centering ourselves, being present. And so we very quickly can pick up when we start to burn, when we start to incline towards suffering in these various ways, which in this sutta are these 8 examples of pain and suffering that manifest through these different unwholesome states. So these considerations, these ways of reflecting, if I allow myself to manifest these unwholesome mind states that may be arising for me, then I will suffer now. I'll blame myself. The wise will blame me, censure me. After death or in the future, I'm heading in a very unfortunate direction. And the taints, vexation, and fever that result from unwholesome thoughts, words, and deeds are with me right now, like a shadow, like an inability to relax, like a sort of despair that's waiting in the wings. If I'm not feeling it already, then it will come for me later. So the Buddha goes on to say to Potalya, it is therefore through the abandoning of these unwholesome states, these 8 unwholesome ways of thinking and being, it is through the abandonment of these that one can develop the renunciation of these states. One can refine one's behavior, and just to consider it, as an example, I may be prone to anger and irritability. If I get angry and irritable today around something someone says or does, I can observe that anger and irritability and see how much it tinged and affected my behavior, my speech, my thoughts. And I can reflect on that. And through reflecting on that and determining to recognize the unwholesomeness there, I can stand on that, and in that way I can refine and avoid the same degree of unwholesomeness in the future. And so next time the same irritating scenario occurs, I may, through this reflection that I've already done and the willingness to try to step away from that irritability, I will find that I'm a little bit less affected, a little bit less reactive, a little bit less likely to say or look, give any indications of the irritability that's felt. And so we reduce the unwholesome gradually. And there comes a point, of course, in this process, as many of you will know, where the things that used to irritate me, at some point, you get to the stage where they no longer have that triggering effect. I'm no longer aroused by this. I'm no longer drawn in to this particular form of suffering. I can step back and remain equanimous. How wonderful to see these moments, to appreciate these moments, to appreciate progress on the path. But even the slightest change and the slightly shorter bouts of irritability and anger, something to celebrate there. So this was the training that the Buddha gave to Potalya. And he went on in this sutta to speak to him a lot about sense desire and how this is to be let go of. He gave him all the different similes for sense desire. There's so many images the Buddha gave to explain to us how we don't want to immerse ourselves in delighting in the pleasures of this world. Briefly, he spoke to Potalya about the dog who's given a meatless bone to chew on. Will that dog's appetite be satisfied? Never. Sense desire, sense pleasures are like a meatless bone, or like a piece of meat picked up by a bird, and the poor bird with a piece of meat gets attacked by all the other birds and suffers terribly, and in the end has to drop the piece of meat. Let us consider sense pleasures in this way, like the blazing grass torch against the wind. We're holding a blazing grass torch and the wind's blowing the flames into our faces. Can we consider sense pleasures and the seeking of sense gratification in this way? Like a charcoal pit. Imagine being pulled towards a deep charcoal pit full of glowing charcoals by a couple of strong people. How we would fight, struggle to get away. This is an attitude we can cultivate towards sense pleasures and their allure, their enticement. It's like a trap. Also, the simile of the fruit tree. Man goes up a fruit tree to collect all the lovely ripe mangoes or oranges or whatever. And in doing so, he's in danger. She's in danger because another person comes along to cut the tree down in order to get that fruit. And what happens then to the person who's climbed the tree? And so in these ways, the Buddha spoke to Potalya at length about the dangers of sense desire. Obviously, he was still immersed in the sense realms, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. And the Buddha led him through and explained to him, this too, all of this is to be let go of. Move away from delighting in the pleasures of the body, in the pleasures of the mind, and step towards renunciation, let go of these things. In the end, Potalya became a disciple of the Buddha. He was enormously helped by these teachings. The final thing the Buddha said to him was, avoid the equanimity that's diversified, avoid the resting in samsara, avoid contentment with the way things are in samsara, in the sense realm. Don't let yourself fall for that. Avoid the equanimity that's diversified. You can move towards, incline towards the equanimity that is unified, that is meditation, that is letting go, that is simplifying the life. And in this way, standing upon the equanimity that's unified, you can let go of all of those sense delights, of the obsession around them, of the immersion in them, of the worldly desires. And the Buddha said, developing the equanimity that's unified, based on unity, then clinging to the material things of this world utterly ceases without remainder. This point can be reached by each one of us through this journey of letting go of pleasure, letting go of pain, letting go of equanimity that is diversified, letting go of everything, trusting, that in the letting go, we're moving in the right direction of peace, direction of freedom from suffering. So I want to speak a little bit about the next sutta that connects in this way with the theme of abandoning, depending upon, dependent abandonment, abandoning this, moving towards that, abandoning that, moving towards greater freedom. Majjhima 137, Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta. It's the exposition of the sixfold base. So this is a teaching that the Buddha gave to the monastics. This is like a stage further. Let's consider, in this teaching, the Buddha spoke about the six senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, sound, smells, sights, tastes, thoughts, contacts, this whole realm of sense desire, the sense world. He explained in this beautiful way of just see what is it made up of? What are we actually dealing with? What is it to have an experience of sense delight or aversion or any kind of reaction at all to the world around us? There are these things happening, just these. It'll either be seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, or cognizing some experience. And so he invited the monastics to investigate these six sense bases: the ear, the eye, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, and these six sense objects: smelling, tasting, seeing, hearing, thinking, and feeling, contact. He asked us to investigate, friends, the consciousness that arises as a result of these processes. So these different separate consciousnesses: seeing consciousness, hearing consciousness, smell, taste, touch, and cognizing. And to recognize these processes, the contact that happens in order for these consciousnesses to arise. And then how do we react to the input? So this is to really deeply investigate what's happening for us. The Buddha said, when we have these experiences through the sense doors, the six sense doors, the consciousnesses that arise as a result, when we experience these things, there are three ways it can go. We can either feel joy at whatever experience it may be, or we can feel grief, or we can feel equanimity. If it's a pleasant experience, pleasant feeling in the body, pleasant mind state, we feel joy. Unpleasant experience, painful experience, we feel grief. Neutral experience, we feel equanimity. And so we can observe how our lives are made up of these experiences and these results: joy, grief, and equanimity. And of course, as you know, through our practice, we get to witness and let go of attachment to these natural responses to experience: the joy, the grief, and the equanimity. It's a beautiful sutta, this Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta, because the Buddha lays it all out. And it's really an invitation, friends, to investigate, kind of slow things down and see how it is that I'm seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. And it's kind of one after another. These experiences come and go. They all string together. If we are not seeing clearly, they'll string together and create a sense of somebody having these experiences. But in fact, when we really investigate, we can see that moment by moment, it is simply an unfolding, experiencing process through these 6 different kinds of consciousness. So we can observe this and see the joy, see the grief, see the equanimity rising in relation to pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral experiences. The Buddha in this sutta goes on to explain the difference between the household mentality and the renunciant mentality. So he speaks about the joys, griefs, and equanimity of a household mentality, a household attitude, a worldly mind heart, and the joys, griefs, and equanimity of the renunciant heart, the person who's on the path of practice, the spiritual seeker, the practitioner, someone who's dedicated towards emerging from suffering. And I'd like to read you what he says regarding the household life, first of all. What are the 6 kinds of joy based on the household life? When one regards as a gain, the gain of sense experiences that are wished for, desired, agreeable, gratifying, and associated with worldliness through the 6 sense doors. Or when one recalls what was formerly obtained from the past, when you look back into the past and see relish and delight in the pleasures and pleasant experiences, gratifying experiences that have been had. So both now and in the past, delighting in pleasant experience. This is the joy of the household life, the household mind. The grief in the household mind, the household heart, is the non-experiencing of these pleasant experiences. So it's not having pleasant, gratifying experiences now and not having recollections of gratifying experiences in the past. We don't get what we want, in short, now or before, then we have grief if we are invested in the world. If we're invested in worldly pleasures, we're going to suffer like hell when we don't get those pleasures that we seek. And the equanimity regarding a household mind, a household heart, is the complacency. It's the resting, basking in samsara. When things are neutral, there's not an excess of pleasure or an excess of pain, things are just ticking along, then the inclination to enjoy that. That's a kind of peace, isn't it? But it's not the peace that we would really truly wish to incline towards. So the joys, griefs, and equanimity of household life, the Buddha explains here. And then he goes on to speak about the renunciant joy, renunciant grief, and renunciant equanimity. So I'm going to quote again from the sutta. What are the 6 kinds of joy based on renunciation? By knowing impermanence, change, fading away, and cessation of forms of any kind of sense input, one sees as it actually is, with proper wisdom, that forms, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, thoughts, both formerly and now, are all impermanent, suffering, and subject to change. When we see this, when we clearly comprehend and operate through the lens of the 3 characteristics, friends, anicca, anatta, dukkha, not self, suffering, impermanent, then we can experience the joy of the renunciant mind heart, the joy of seeing things clearly, the joy of understanding the way things are, that beautiful sense of clarity, of knowing that we're moving in the right direction, of the ability it gives us to let go of samsara, let go of being immersed in the kind of mire, the marsh, the mud of immersion in liking and not liking, all the different experiences we may have, to be able to step out of that, to dust ourselves down, to clean up, and to stand on solid ground. This is the joy of the renunciant life. And the grief of the renunciant life, the renunciant mind heart, is when we know the impermanence, change, fading away, and cessation of all experiences. We see clearly as it is that all experiences, both formerly and now, are impermanent, suffering, subject to change. And so we generate a longing for the supreme liberations. Thus, when will I enter upon and abide in that base that the noble ones now enter upon and abide in? So this longing for freedom, longing for peace, longing for the complete letting go of suffering, we yearn to experience the end of the path, do we not? This yearning, this longing to be free now, to be able to let go of it all now, rather than struggling with all the different characters here, part of us wanting to be able to inexorably just move towards letting go of all suffering, and other parts of us that actually rather want to continue to delight or to hate, to suffer in various ways, whether pleasant or unpleasant, to remain immersed in samsara, to wish to continually hold to this sense of somebody here, this life, my rights, my views, my opinions, and so forth. We have a whole load of characters here, a whole load of mind states that we have to tame and we have to direct towards freedom. And it's a process for most of us, is it not? It can be a struggle, it can be a challenge. And day by day we can feel, I'm just not getting anywhere. If only I could just clearly see the way forward, just let go of this desire, this obsession, this anger, this grief, this depression, this mind state, that mind state. And so this is the grief of the renunciant heart mind that truly wishes to be free from suffering but isn't there yet. And then the Buddha goes on to say, what are the 6 kinds of equanimity based on renunciation? Again, seeing clearly, knowing impermanence, not self, and suffering, seeing the way things actually are with proper wisdom, that forms both formerly and now are all impermanent, suffering, and subject to change. This equanimity arises. This is the equanimity based on renunciation. So when we can rest in the clarity around seeing the 3 characteristics, how everything's changing, there's no self that we can hold on to in this maelstrom of change, this whirling vortex, this kaleidoscope of change, and that it's all unsatisfactory, therefore it's all suffering. It's not perfect, it never can be. There's no movement towards perfection in samsara, friends. The only way forward is to step back from it, to let go of investment in this perpetual journey of pleasant and painful and neutral, liking, disliking. This perpetual journey of wanting that will never cease through more wanting, hating that will never cease through more hating. This need to unclench the fists, open the hands, give it all away, let it all go. This recognition enables the equanimity of the renunciant mind heart to manifest, where we can, one way I see it is that we can gradually appreciate a picture, the understanding, the appreciation of the way things are just grows. Our perspective broadens. The picture gets bigger and bigger, and so we can see the cycles of suffering, the relentless trauma that samsara enacts again and again and again, and how engagement with that through identification with any place, any piece of that, is only to manifest in further suffering. But to disidentify, to step back from experience, is to develop this equanimity that enables us to see clearly, to be intimately connecting, intimately engaged, but not ruffled by samsara, by the experiences that are playing out for this mind and body for as long as it's alive. So this, the equanimity based on renunciation. And here the Buddha states, by depending on this, we should abandon that. So for Potalya, depending upon his wish, his willingness to step away from unwholesome states, he could rest on that in order to purify, refine, let go, abandon further. So in this sutta, the Buddha says, by depending and relying on the 6 kinds of joy based on renunciation, that is the joy of renunciation as it manifests through the 6 senses, the 6 kinds of consciousness, the sense consciousnesses. The joy of renunciant life, we can stand on that, we can incline towards that, and in doing so, we can let go of the joy of household life. This is the way to let go, to incline towards these renunciant joys, the joy of clarity, the joy of right view, the joy of path, so we can let go of the sense realm gradually, ease our way out of it, dust ourselves off, clean ourselves up. And he says, abandon and surmount the 6 kinds of grief based on the household life, not getting what we want. We can let go of those and incline towards the 6 kinds of joy, grief based on the renunciant life. The 6 renunciant kinds of grief, the grief of longing for freedom, can surmount and overcome the grief of not getting what we want, the household grief. And in the same way, the equanimity of the renunciant can overcome the equanimity, the complacency of the household mind-heart. So we want to use one to surmount the other. Let the renunciant attitudes and understanding overcome the household inclinations that we may have. And then we can use the 6 kinds of joy, renunciant joy, to overcome renunciant grief. Let's not dwell in longing for the path, longing for the goal, longing for freedom. Let's work for it. Let's focus on the clarity of view, anicca, anatta, dukkha, and our ability to, using this lens, to free ourselves gradually from suffering. Let's focus on that process rather than longing for some future liberation. This is a futile exercise. So to let the renunciant joy eclipse, overcome, enable us to abandon the renunciant grief. And then the Buddha said we should allow the renunciant equanimity, the equanimity that we begin to grow, manifest, experience as a result of clear seeing. Let that overcome, eclipse, and do away with the joys of renunciant life. So this movement, friends, from grief to joy to equanimity is something we can deeply consider. You could say from suffering to could say happiness, you could say bliss, and then you could say from bliss and happiness to peace, to contentment, to profound well-being. Finally, and this piece is so beautiful to consider, the Buddha finishes by saying, in all of this overcoming and surmounting of the lesser happiness with the greater happiness, when we have an equanimity that is a renunciant equanimity that comes through clarity, through clear seeing, let's work towards letting go of the diversity of equanimity by developing a unified equanimity. That is, to appreciate as we progress on the path how much more simple the mind becomes, how much more one-pointed, focused, at peace the mind becomes. So we start the practice and we try meditating, and we've got the monkey mind. We're dealing with the mind that's completely out of control. And it's very humbling and very shocking for many of us, is it not, to discover that we're so enslaved by the monkey mind. And as we continue our practice, let go of unwholesomeness, as Patalia was directed to do, investigate reality deeply, as we're directed to do in this sutta, Salayatana Vibhanga Sutta, to begin to let go of layer after layer of defilements. As we continue to progress in this way, there is this peace that begins to grow, the peace of one-pointedness, of simplicity, of clarity. And we can observe this and allow the unified equanimity to eclipse, overcome the diverse equanimity, the equanimity of non-reactivity in the midst of samsara, in the midst of all the impressions, inputs, happenings of our lives. So our lives will quite naturally on the path incline towards greater simplicity, more peacefulness, less activity, more contemplation, more meditation. Is this not so? Less sense input. We start to appreciate less is more. Peace is beautiful. Peace is ineffable. Peace is the inclination of our hearts. We incline towards peace. We incline towards silence. We incline towards tranquility, solitude, so forth. And then finally, the Buddha says in this beautiful sutta, he says, finally, by depending and relying on non-identification, we can abandon and surmount the equanimity that is unified, that is based upon unity. So friends, this is the beautiful last piece of the jigsaw of the map of the path to the ultimate freedom of Nibbana. When we have surmounted the diversity of equanimity with more unified, more peaceful, more simple, the mind that inclines toward jhana, the mind that inclines towards one-pointedness, we can recognize that the next thing we need to be very aware of is to let go of any identification with that piece of conceit, that sense of self, that sense of ownership or control, anything that's holding together and giving a sense of being somebody, being something here, something behind the experience. This we can seek out, with the laser-like bright beam of light that is the unified mind, a mind that's ever more peaceful through the letting go of the unwholesome, the letting go of the diversity of experience. We can apply this clarity, this bright light, this laser beam of awareness to seek out any sense of self here and allow that journey to overcome and enable abandonment of all that went before, and to root out this final fetter, the fetter, that sense of I am. Ewam. I've said a little bit about these two suttas. There's so much more. Please read them and consider deeply these beautiful teachings. Thank you very much for your wise attention and for your practice, friends. And I'm going to just see. I've spoken at length, actually. There's not much time. I just want to greet those I've not greeted yet. Hi, Maria from Nova Scotia. Welcome. Bhumika, Eileen, Tora, Gampola, Richard, Jayantha, Edward, Mandy, Gregory. Wonderful to know that you're all present at this point. Also, Thai friend and Charles Lee and Amarantha. Hi. I just have one comment, which is great because the time is short now. Madeline, thank you. Madeline says, let me see if I can get this up. Okay. I like to recall the Dhammapada. Look not to the faults of others, nor to their omissions and commissions, but rather look to your acts, to what you have done and left undone. Sadhu. What a beautiful way to conclude. Isn't it true, friends? As Madeline's pointing out, this path of practice is such a strong call for us to withdraw all the projections out there. There is no out there. There is simply this suffering heart mind here, and to allow ourselves to bring the attention home is to enable us to follow these steps of practice that I've been speaking about here today. This is one way of elucidating the path. There are so many, but for us to even take the first steps on the path, we so need to stop projecting our energy, our attention out there, because it's nothing but a mirror of the heart mind that is here, with all of its complexity until it's simplified, with all of its dark corners until they're opened up and cleaned. When we see fault out there, isn't it the case that we have some pain and suffering right here, some unresolved material that needs to be unearthed, and all with great kindness. We can very kindly, very considerately and very gently do this work of uprooting the suffering, uprooting the defilements, cleaning up the mess here. Yeah, thank you, Madeline. Look not to the faults of others, nor to their omissions and commissions. There's no end to that, is there? We'll always find more if we seek in that direction. We're on the treadmill. We're in the cycles of history, cycles of trauma, cycles of suffering. When we are able to take responsibility for our part by paying attention here and purifying and cleaning up and moving towards freedom, moving towards clarity, moving towards peace here, then we can really be a sort of source of good fortune in the world, a source of comfort, a source of release, a peace is what we can offer into the world. That's really the very best we can do. And so for all those suffering at this time, desperate suffering happening in the world around us, for all those who are suffering, let's dedicate our energy, our effort, not to judge or blame anyone, but to have great compassion for the struggle that we're all engaged in, the struggle to free our hearts from dukkha, from suffering. Ewam. So friends, let's conclude. Let's pay homage to our teacher, the Buddha, with 3 heartfelt sadhus. Please do join in if you feel inclined to give voice to your veneration of the Buddha and the Buddha's great teachings. Sadhu, 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 anumodami.